Yes, that's what that's the leaning barn. You figured that out? And I'm not reading that piece from him, but I used that as a jumping off place.
Yeah.
And it kind of evolved into a whole thing on farming. So there'll be a little bit on soil conservation, a little bit on the culture of farms and where they've gone and maybe where we're going. And then that kind of led me right into, we're talking about food and where food comes from. So, we haven't had a communion since I've been here, actually. And it's not a UU tradition, so we're not doing the traditional Christian communion. But we are doing a UU interpretation of it.
Reunion.
Yeah, a farmer's communion. And as I was researching communion through the UU materials, they do water communion. That's actually the water ceremony we do in the fall. That really is a communion. That's sharing. You bring something and share, and then you take something home. Except with the water communion, you're not taking anything home.
And we don't have to drink it.
And you don't have to drink it, particularly out of the communal bowl. I would drag my feet on that.
From all over the world.
Yes.
Slightly aged.
And with everybody is touching it, and who knows what they carried at home in. And the other is a flower communion, which everybody brings a flower to contribute, which I think that might be something we might want to think about doing in the spring.
You've done that before?
And then there was a third one. Let's see, water, flower. I can't remember what the third
Should be
one was.
one geology oriented as well.
Might have been. Bring a little bit of dirt from wherever you've been.
Or crystals or what have you.
So it's not. And some churches are more Christian oriented than others. And then I found like Christian litanies that they go through, and I have a litany that I pulled out. The resources. It's not a Christian litany, but it's a UU interpretation of that. Basically, it's the same thing I harp on constantly as building community, and that's what communion is it's the root of community, and that's what we want to keep building our community as we go along. So that's what we're trying to do. So I don't have any live inserts in the thing in the slideshow today. So, and the other thing I wanted to say is if you have any suggestions, Kenny is the one that brought this one with the leaning barn. He's the one that got me started on the whole farming thing. And it was an interesting little article about it. And I'll go, this is in the stuff I wrote down. But his barn was leaning, so he took 2 or 3 poles and used it to prop up the barn. And that's maybe a farming tradition in some place, but most farmers would actually fix it right. They wouldn't just put a few poles there and leave it setting up. But the gist of the idea is we all are leaning, and we all need someone to help prop us up. And we're just going to extend that into a little more. If the roof's leaking or the foundation's cracked or whatever else, that's community that helps us put that back together. So we got.
When I was growing up, I lived on a farm, and we had the most beautiful farm. It was a beautiful, beautiful farm, inside and out. Well, we moved from that area, or not area, but we moved. And the new people who moved into the farm, and children burned the farm down. And I still am heartbroken about that farm.
Yeah. Well, that's part of what, we'll give you a prelude or a preview of what we're looking at. When you're driving around Dark County or any rural county, you're going to see barns everywhere. But this is what they're coming to look like more and more.
That one looks like the one we had pretty much, the kids.
And that's pretty much a standard thing. And I'll kind of go into that a little bit. This is what they look like now. And what we're going to discuss is as culture moves ahead and as civilization moves ahead and as progress moves ahead, what the countryside looks like moves along with it. So there was a reason for barns the way they were. How many of you are familiar with Malabar Farm? That's the state park, Ohio State Park, Lewis Bromfield. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I would highly recommend that. If it's a trip, if you want to go, it's about 2.5 hours up over to Columbus and then up 71.
It's a wonderful tour, just wonderful. Owned by the state of Ohio State Park, wonderful tours.
And I'll give you a little background on that. This is one of the more original pictures from it. And then, of course, we got to finish with the farm scene If you get a chance, look at it fairly closely. This is a Dutch farm scene because you can see, if you can see from back there, there's a windmill in the distance that pumps water. Plus I'm not sure who the artist was, but I've never seen a Holstein cow with Ubangi African cow horns on it, those ones that come up like that. But it's got everything else. It's got the ducks, it's got the chickens, it's got the draft horse, it's got the squirrel.
I don't think it has any geese, however.
No, but they do have the balloon and the hawk. So it's a fun depiction. It's one of those nostalgic things that, you know how nostalgia is. It's not always true. In fact, it's hardly ever true. But the image, the kind of the odor, the whiff, the kind of vision of what was there is what you're remembering, not the actual reality of what was there. All right, we've gone through the bells. Welcome to First Universalist Church in New Madison. Hope everybody had a good Christmas and a good New Year's. Today is the January thaw, which we only had, 3 days of freezing weather, and now it's thawing already. So don't ask me to explain global warming to you, because I know half of you won't believe it, and half of you already know it, so we're not going to go into that. As long as we're on the topic of things people don't believe, you need to wear your mask, you need to wash your hands. The virus is spreading unbelievably rapidly. So far, it's turned out to be a little milder. But still 90% of the people in the hospital are unvaccinated. 90% of the people dying from it are unvaccinated. And unfortunately, this current one is affecting children more and more. There's more and more kids getting sick now, and more kids are ending up in the hospital. That is a scary, scary thing. And the only dark humor, good side I can find to it is all the people that are ignoring the vaccination and ignoring the masking rules and are dying tend to be the more conservative people that vote for the more conservative ballots. So if this continues for much longer, the blue states will spread, I think, farther south and farther west. So, do we have any announcements? Okay, anybody that has suggestions for our sign, I keep trying to come up with something that's humorous and short. Please let us know. The one that's there now is kind of a play on words, autumn leaves, meaning autumn goes away, autumn leaves go away. The virus is not. We'd like to change those occasionally if we can. So if you have any ideas or you see something, let us know and we'll stick that up there. We're going to try something different today. I have a little communion laid out. We've talked about communion in the past. I've never had it since I've been here, except as we talked about the water communion and the flour communion. Since we're talking about farming and where our food comes from, I thought I would throw it in, but because this is a UU church, we're using Christmas cookies and cider, and there won't be any talk of the body of Christ or the blood of Christ. Communion is, we're building community, that's what we're doing. So. And, as Mike noted, all creatures, great and small, the debut for the new season is tonight. Once again, all about farming, and farming in the good old days, and particularly the good old country. You can't help but like to watch what goes on in Great Britain, England specifically. They just have an entirely different way of living. It seems more civilized. I never get tired of watching those shows, and I'm kind of starting to feel more British, so I'm wearing a tie again. This is my cow tie, it's my farm tie. But those guys, even when they go out, my dad was a vet, and I used to help him when we go out on calls. I never saw my dad wear a tie and a sweater into the hog barn or the cattle barn. And I've seen James step out into the muck with his shoes and his suit on and walk through the cow manure and the mud. And I can't believe he didn't have a pair of wellies with him. So. All right. Anything else? Our prelude is Day by Day. Day by day, and that's how we live, day by day. Our chalice lighting is A Flame to Light Our Path by Deborah Burrell. Fire consumes and casts a bright light. May our chalice flame consume our regrets for the past, our fears about the future, and our worries about today. Kind of a New Year's oriented. Our opening hymn is "Oh for a World." That's a paper that everybody's been handed, hopefully. Sing along if you feel the move to do so. Where time and tears will be no more and all but love will cease, we can always hope and pray. All right. Our children's story, and as you can see by our slide here, we're on farming and we're going to continue on farming. The soil that sustains us. This is by Ariel Aronson. I bet she's Scandinavian. The dictionary defines soil as the upper layer of earth in which plants grow, or a black or dark brown material, typically consisting of a mixture of organic remains, clay, and rock particles. But I like to think of it as a community. There are three main mineral components of soil: clay, sand, and silt. There's also a little bit of organic matter made up from decayed plant and animal material. When organic matter is really broken down so it can't decompose anymore, it's humus or humus, which shares a root with the word human. In addition to minerals and organic matter, also in the soil are billions of microorganisms. Microorganisms are tiny, tiny little life forms like bacteria and fungi. These microbes, together with the roots of plants, make up the community of the soil. Just like we humans need to get certain nutrients from our food to be healthy, so do plants. Plants are sunlight powered to make their own food out of air and water, but just like we can't live healthily off our only carbs, there are some nutrients plants need that they can't get through photosynthesis. Luckily, they've developed a system of exchange with the soil microbes. The microbes are able to break down minerals in rock or capture nutrients from the air. In this and other ways, they get their nutrients into forms that plants can take up. In exchange, plants feed the microbes sugars. All this is happening under the soil's surface. This is what happens in healthy soils. The system of cooperation breaks down when the plants stop needing the microbes. Why would they stop needing the microbes? When we heavily apply chemical fertilizers. The plants get addicted to the quick fix. They are freed from the slow process of relationship building, of having to share. If the plants are annuals, they'll be gone the next year, and the community system will have broken down. The next year's crop will need the chemical fertilizer to do well because the relationship between plants and soil microbes has suffered. It will take years to restore. But the degradation is preventable and restoration is possible. It just takes a lot of care and learning to see crops not simply as products we take out of the land, but as part of a valuable community. And all that starts with soil. Learning to see soil as more than just dirt. You might even think of it as sacred. This is a picture, and we'll go through, actually let's go to the sermon, or the presentation right now. No, let's do joys and concerns first, and then we'll do the message. Joys and concerns. I want to bring up the floods in Washington, if you're aware of those. These are new floods. Remember I talked a couple weeks ago about the floods in Washington and British Columbia and all the dairy, beef, chickens, and hogs that had drowned, and the ones that were marooned on islands and the trouble they were having feeding them. They're getting another session of floods at this time. So we want to keep the farmers and actually the people who are driving down flooded streets and whose houses are washing away in our thoughts and prayers. And yes?
I'd like for you to light a candle in, I guess, out of concern. And I have two friends, husband and wife, Richard and Reba. And actually, I was visiting them last week while I wasn't here. But unfortunately, they've had their share of medical challenges. And my friend Reba is in a nursing home right now, hoping to get out, but not sure. And my friend Richard, her husband, is actually in the James Center with some serious medical challenges. So very difficult for them, friends for many years who live in Middletown.
All right, we want to keep Richard and Reba in our thoughts and prayers. Complimenting the floods in the east, or the floods in the west. Snow, I don't know if you saw the snow in the east. 27 hours, people were trapped on the Interstate 95 in Virginia. 27 hours. Interesting stories of people helping people. When the guy who owned the bread truck called his driver and said, open up the back doors and give everybody bread who's parked anywhere within reach of you. And then the funny stories of people trapped in their cars for 27 hours, and of course having to answer the call of nature, trying to hide behind their car doors. And you can imagine thousands of people, literally thousands of people, doing their business on the interstate. That must have been an interesting picture. So We'll find a little humor in everything.
Now with the snow and ice, and they got
And the last thing I'll bring up is our concern for governments, governments whose responsibility is to their citizens and to the people. The state of Florida, right before Christmas and New Year's, let over 500,000 cases or 500,000 individual cartons of individual tests for COVID expire in a warehouse rather than hand them out to people who want to be tested. The state of Florida still has a mandate that you cannot wear masks. Well, they cannot mandate masks in schools, and they cannot mandate vaccinations. They are being sued by the families of children who are suffering under medical afflictions and are afraid for their health. They don't have remote schools, so these kids have to go to school. And even if they wear a mask and the other kids aren't, the kids who are infecting people are going around spreading the virus. So what has happened to government with the responsibility to protect everybody, not just their friends? Anything else? All right, one last candle for those thoughts and prayers, those fears, those agonies, those things you want to share but don't feel you can share them out loud. You can launch those into the ether with thoughts, and we will be there to receive them. Okay, the message. Farms, where have they gone? Farming is a metaphor. And Kenny brought me an article about the leaning barn, the gist of which is the farmer propped it up by implying we are all leaning and need support. I wholeheartedly agree that sometimes we need a bulwark against the storms of living, that our foundations can be undercut and need shoring up, that rain can come down and the roof needs reinforcing. But the builder in me resists these stopgap methods of emergency repair. Maybe it's part of that German stubbornness that says don't rely on others, but conversely, always be there if others need help. That is part of the rural ethos of independence yet neighborliness. No farmer would ask for help, but few would refuse it if offered. Fire, tornadoes, floods, medical crises will bring farmers on the run with equipment, supplies, feed, and shelter. Crops will be combined, cows milked, hogs fed, hays baled. In times of trouble, farmers will come in droves, no recompense expected or accepted. In 1900, 40% of the population were farmers. 60% lived in rural areas. In 1987, 2% lived on the farm. In 1800, it was 90%. How has this change in demographics changed us, changed our country, changed our experience, changed our culture? Part of the change you can see in the soil erosion. This is what farming was like in the early 1900s. People plowed it, they farmed it, they plowed in the fall, and nobody paid much attention to what happened with erosion. This is what happens as a result of the changing of the culture. And this is kind of a little blink on our history. Not too long ago, 60 or 120 acres was a farm. Frugal living yielded a modest life, supplemented by an off-farm job. In later years, that would be the wife. A good living was attainable. Each farm was self-sustaining. Horses were farm power. They reproduced themselves for sale or replacement. Can you imagine if tractors could have baby tractors that would grow into four-wheel drive behemoths? Every farm had chickens for eggs and meat, hogs for sale and holiday feasts, cows for milk and barbecues. Barring accident or illness, they all replaced themselves. The crops on the farm provided food for the livestock and the family. The woodlot provided heat for cooking and building barns. Every farm had a barn for animals, forage, and equipment. The little stave silo you see here held ensilage, that's chopped corn or grass that was fermented into a ruminant's repast. The little building at the front, which you can see here, was the milk house, where cans of milk were stored in a cold water bath until picked up by the milk hauler. The barn was tall, livestock on the lower level, hay and straw up above. You still see these barns all over the countryside, but they are dilapidated, disused, distressed. They are rarely maintained because no one has pigs, chickens, or cows anymore. No one puts up hay, and the machinery that needs to be sheltered is much too big for an old wooden barn. The barns today are not called barns, they're called machinery sheds or shops or maybe stables if you live in kind of a rich area of the country. They are tall because the new combines are 18 foot or higher. The headers may be 36 feet wide. They have concrete floors, metal sides, and most have an office or a kitchen where the output from mega farms is trucked across the country to occupy their refrigerators and pantries. And we have become the mega farms, from 60 to 600 to 6,000 acres. Some of you may be aware of Continental Grain on the Troy-Piqua Road, County Road 25. That's between Troy and Piqua. It used to service Miami County and surrounding counties for grain storage, milling, and shipping. Now, 2 farmers own that entire facility and use it exclusively for their own grain handling. There must be like 12 giant silos and grain handling equipment and scales and all the machinery that goes with an elevator that serviced an entire county is now owned by 2 farmers. These 2 businessmen, and I use that word advisedly, I don't call them farmers anymore, they're businessmen. They manage the productive land that used to sustain 100 or more families. That is productivity. That is progress. Farming is no longer one family on the land. It is a business. Computers, accountants, satellites. John Deere is introducing in this year autonomous tillage equipment for general sales. Tractors and combines that are controlled remotely like the drones that haunt the skies of the Middle East. The agriculturalist sits in an office and supervises robotically driven equipment by computer screen. No dust, no grease, no sweat. If you want to see the transition in solid form, go to Malabar Farm State Park by Mansfield, Ohio on I-71. 1,000 acres of eroded hilly farmland bought by Louis Bromfield, a famous author and screenwriter in the 30s, whose only claim to fame that you might recognize is that he married Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall at his country house. He wrote numerous books and did screenplays, none of which anybody has ever heard of in these days, and I'm assuming anybody younger than probably 50 or 60 doesn't know who Humphrey Bogart is or Lauren Bacall. But he was friends with the Hollywood elite, and they actually came to his little house in the middle of Ohio to get married. And if you go to the Malabar Farm State Park, the house is still there, and he built that house even though he had a lot of money and a lot of money to buy 1,000 acres and restore it. He built that house as a traditional farmhouse. They had a house, they built on a little addition, and they built on another little addition, and that's what you'll see is a house that was built in true farmer tradition. As the family grew, you added on. As the family grew more, you added on again. As you made a little more money, you added on a little bit more. He was one of the first to recognize and showcase the effects of contour plowing, cover crops, grassy waterways, and crop rotation to control erosion. This is a picture of the lake, and you can see the house on the left, the barns and the silo in the back. They still farm there at Malabar Farm is a kind of exemplary farm. We go over in the spring occasionally. They have a plowing contest with horses, which is always fun to see. And then the next picture is, this is Malabar Farm. He actually used these Ford Ferguson's tractors in the 40s and the 50s. This is what he farmed 1,000 acres with, so you can imagine what that was like. He did it in the new soil conservation method. These are all accepted practices today, though you can still see fall plowing and the resultant gullies in the fields of Darke County as you drive down the back roads. Fall plowing is considered a no-no because it takes all the debris off the surface and lets the water just wash right through, and that's what cuts the gullies in. If you see the farmers who leave a cover crop in the fall and over the winter, or the farmers who plant actually a green cover crop, those are the farmers who care about building soil, which takes thousands of years to build an inch of soil and can be washed away in one storm. Malabar Farm has a restaurant with locally secured food and a roadside stand for fruits and vegetables, which has a cooler that's fed by a natural spring that never stops. So when you pull your vegetables, they pull them out of a concrete tank that the water just runs through constantly at 55 degrees. Malabar Farm illustrates the paradox of rural culture. The folks who live there, who are born there, who work there, who never move from there are insular. They have good hearts and a connection with the land and nature, but are suspicious of outsiders. An outsider is anyone who has not lived there for more than 3 generations. We lived in Pleasant Hill for more than 10 years. Tara was the minister and a mainstay of the community. She presided over weddings, funerals, visiting hospitals and nursing homes, and she counseled troubled souls from any denomination. I was a volunteer firefighter, a paramedic, a precinct election worker, and yet we remained strangers in a strange land. Maybe it was because we were Democrats. I suspect it was more like a parable related by another long-term resident who allowed that even though her children were born in Pleasant Hill, they were not accepted as truly belonging. As she was told, even if your cat has kittens born in my oven, they will never be called biscuits. You get that? Your cat has kittens in my oven, they're not biscuits. Your kids are born in Pleasant Hill, they're still not natives of Pleasant Hill, they're still cats. They're still alien, they're still from the outside. Being born somewhere doesn't make you a native, although it does make you a citizen of the United States. That is the anchor baby. That's why people try to get into this country to have and people from China are coming now to have their babies born here so they can be U.S. citizens. So, suspicious of science, learning, anything futuristic, rural residents cling tenaciously to the past. They reject solar farms, wind-powered electricity, CO2 sequestration, and of course, vaccines and masks. This is the paradox. Generous without hesitation to those initiated to their tribe, these small-town citizens cannot seem to find room in the inn for the dispossessed, the different, the dissonant. Do you remember when it used to snow and blow? A blizzard like 78 means something else to a farmer. At the first sign of a blizzard, smart farmers would run a rope from the back door of their house out to the barn. They did this because they had heard stories of people who had wandered off and been frozen to death, having lost sight of the house and the barn in a whiteout while they were still in their own backyards. They knew they would have to go out. There were critters in the barn that required their attention. They could not shirk the responsibility of care. They knew they'd have to venture out into a world in which they could lose sight of home, hence the rope. We don't face anything like that kind of blizzard, but we face blizzards of another sort. It swirls around us as economic injustice, ecological pain, physical and spiritual violence, and the inevitable outcome, war. It swirls within us as fear and frenzy, greed and deceit, and the indifference to the suffering of others. We all know stories of people who have wandered off into this madness and have been separated from their own souls, losing their moral bearings and even their mortal lives. The lost ones come from every walk of life: clergy and corporate executives, politicians, people on the street, celebrities, and school children. Some of us fear that we or those we love will become lost in the storm. Some of us are lost at this moment and are trying to find our way home. Some are lost without knowing it. Some of us have just reached for the rope. Others are in the middle of the journey trying to hold on to their grip. Others have just arrived home. My own experience of the blizzard, which includes getting lost in it more often than I like to admit, tells me that the soul's order and life's hope can never be destroyed, only obscured. But the common compassion of friends, that rope is always at hand, offering time after time the chance to regain our bearings and find our way home. This is from Parker Palmer, A Hidden Wholeness. That's a book he's written. In the blizzard of busyness, we can get lost in our own backyard, lose sight of the way back home. Friends along the path can be our rope, our lifeline, helping us find our way to do the service that is ours to do, helping us so we don't get lost even when they aren't there. Our mission is to nurture each other's spiritual journeys, foster compassion and understanding. Our congregations gather to heal disconnection by nurturing each other in our spiritual journeys, fostering compassion and understanding within and beyond our congregations, and engaging in service to transform ourselves and our world. Journey groups support our journey toward deeper connection with ourselves, with others, and with the mystery of life. And this church that this person came from had small group, and you've heard of those, where small groups form in the church to support each other. We are the small group in this church. We are all struggling to find our way home to what we care most deeply about and who we most want to be. Preaching isn't enough, at least mine isn't. I wish it were. You need to gain more than what I can give you. You need what you can give each other. And my little story is, we didn't have a rope from the house to the barn. I lived in a house about a quarter, well, it was more like a half a mile away from the home farm where my parents lived after they retired, but all the livestock was at their farm, not the farm I was on. If you remember the blizzards and the snows, not of '78, but the years after that, there were still some years of pretty big snow. And luckily my father-in-law and his wife used to travel through Michigan and do snowmobile things. Anybody familiar with those? They'd drive from bar to bar, which seems unbelievable to me, on a snowmobile, drink, drive to another bar, have another drink, drive to another bar and have another drink. How they managed to live that long, I don't know. But he loaned me his snowmobile for that winter, and that was my twice a day, morning and night. I would ride a snowmobile to the farm, feed the cows, take care of the horses, make sure the water was running, put down bedding, straw, and put down hay and silage. Ride back home again, build the wood fire. That evening, I would ride back to the farm again and do chores again. So there is a reality to farming. There is a responsibility to taking care of the animals that depend on you. There's no place else they're going to get their food or bedding, or anybody's going to take care of them. We are the farmers for each other. We are responsible for each other's care. Comments or questions? Okay.
I have a couple points I'd like to make.
Yes.
Just thoughts, because your presentation was so rich in making all kinds of connections with plants, the soil, and what have you. I found it interesting. It was a random thought that I had during the presentation, Jim. When the farmers moved from the East Coast across America to new lands and opportunities, as much of all of our families did, I find it interesting because I was researching some of my family members who did just that. Some from Kentucky moving up to Indiana, some moving from New Jersey all the way via Pennsylvania, northern Ohio to Indiana. They all received relatively large land grants. And those large land grants over the years, if you follow the township and all the maps, county maps and township maps, you find that those large tracts of land could not have been possibly all farmed when they moved here. They didn't have equipment. They might have had 12 kids to help. But I find it interesting because as you look through the years and you talk about a sense of greater community, those families with all of those children started dividing those 300-acre tracts up. And there would be 40 here and 60 here and 120 here, including Darke County, Ohio. Yep. And so if you're interested in doing any genealogy research, whatever county you may live, please do that, and you will be truly amazed at how your families not only sought opportunity and additional land and livelihoods through their lives, but they've created that sense of community where many of us are still apart.
And that's part of that transition that happened. You know, they got the land grants, and the government did that on purpose to encourage people to settle these wild lands, because the British were trying to come down from Canada. The Indians, of course, already lived here, and the American government wanted it to be held by ethnic white Americans. So they were giving land away, and they did that even along the railroads all the way out west. Remember the great land rush on Kansas and Arkansas. And what happened was these farmers got these size of lands. They had kids, they divided them up as they died, and their kids inherited pieces of it. So they started out in large tracts, went to smaller and smaller tracts, and now what's happening? The kids are selling out, they're dying, and other farmers are accumulating more and more land. These two farmers that farm continental grain are farming more than 7,000 acres in Miami County. They're farming practically the whole county. It's almost unbelievable. I don't know, I should have looked to see how many acres are in Miami County, but I'm sure they're doing contiguous counties as well.
So perhaps land ownership is also a cycle, and in terms of largeness and acreage.
Yeah, and they don't own all this land. There's still a lot of widows and orphans and families who own the land but can't afford to farm it economically, so they either share crop or they rent. And actually, we have 300 acres in northern Indiana, which I farmed, and we were milking 50 cows and had about 25 cattle as feeder cattle from my dad. And then we always had a couple hogs. We had turkeys, we had chickens, raised our own eggs. We used to butcher our own chickens, but man, that got to be nasty. So there's an Amish family about 20 miles away that you could take your chickens up in a cage and they would butcher them and give them back to you frozen. I like that much better. We had 2 turkeys, which was a fun time. My wife took Turkey Lurkey, that was her name, took her into kids show and tell in the 6th grade, carried a turkey through the school so the kids could pet her. And Turkey Lurkey had a sister, well actually a brother, who we were going to butcher for Christmas. That was Thanksgiving, but that was such a pet we just couldn't do it. So we had a pork loin or a ham hock or something, and Turkey Lurkey ran around, and you could call her. You could pick up a grasshopper and call her, and she would run up and take that grasshopper out of your hand. So anything can be a pet. Some people will tell you chickens and fowl are stupid. They're nuts. Chickens can be as good a pet as any pet there is.
Let me, if I may.
Yes.
We had a member went to this church for years, Betsy Valentine, correct? Remember that? From her, she lived out off of Wilt Road. Right road, yeah. She took a rope, remember this, Kenny? The rope went from the mailbox to her house. When we had that 78 Blizzard, that didn't work because the rope was covered up with snow, okay? And blowing. Can you remember that?
Yeah, they used it.
That's what she used it for. So we had to go out, and the rope got bad, we had to go put a new rope up for her. God, when she drove her mom to the church here, she was a diehard.
Yep.
I don't think she was ever married, was she?
Her rope was, I don't think so. Her rope was for a different purpose though.
Yeah.
She was so frail and light, she was afraid she'd be blown away.
Well,
She used the rope to hang on to.
Independence. Independence.
Yes.
Was what
They went out with snowmobiles during that blizzard to check on her, and she was better provided for than most other people that they checked on.
That's right, Kenny.
She had her provisions, she was stocked up.
She put everything up.
Yeah.
She stocked up.
She was stocked up.
People
that's-
loved her, people loved her, and she was just one of a kind.
And she would help, I'm sure would help anybody who needed anything.
Yeah.
And that's what we talked about, the independence of farmers. They would never ask for help, but they're always there to help other people. But they will accept help if there's a tornado or something happens, and people come to help. They don't say, we don't want you. They say, we're grateful and we accept it. Yes.
I enjoyed your talk this
No.
morning, and I was remembering when we went to visit Malabar Farms, and the children were young, and they were showing us around the house, and here is the house where, tell me, movie stars.
Humphrey
Bogart. Yeah.
Here's the room where they stayed for their honeymoon. Well, my kids and I giggled because there were 2 single beds in that room. And so the kids got a kick out of that. And I was too.
If you can remember, and I'm sure they pushed those 2 beds together. And maybe there was even a double bed in there at the time, but if everybody knows about the Decency Act or whatever it was called, And you can remember when you were watching Leave It to Beaver and all those other shows, they always had 2 twin beds. It's like everybody's an idiot and doesn't know what really happens when people are married. But that's one of those things that we're going through, that cultural transition of people pretending what is supposed to be right and wrong and trying to enforce it on other people. And that still goes on today when people pretend that people who are gay can't care for each other and can't have a physical relationship. Just because you don't do it that way or don't want to do it that way or would never do it that way doesn't mean it can't do for other people. So, and that's what we want to pass on, is that acceptance of other lifestyles and that acceptance of other people as real human beings.
One other thing, kid.
Yep.
We had 2 elevators in this village when I was growing up. There was one in Savona when you were growing up. We've lost them all.
Yep.
Okay, that was huge. The white would come in and come down Washington Street to dump their grain. Remember all that, Kenny? Remember how they back out in Savona? It's all gold. It's a different brew.
That's part of that transition. We had a corn sheller, a hand corn sheller, if you're familiar with those. You drop the corn in the top and turn the handle and it shells the corn and the cob pops out one end and the shell pops out the other end. And that's what we did to feed our chickens. But as people got more and more cows, instead of milking 2 or 3 cows by hand, then they got milking machines, and that's what they had the little milk house for. Mm-hmm. That's where the cold water bath was, and eventually for us, that was a bulk tank was in there, and we milked 50 cows. But as they milked those cows, and a lot of farmers, and we ground our own feed, but a lot of farmers they took their crops to town. The mill had a big grinder that would grind everything up. They would add the vitamins, the minerals, the supplements that you wanted, the soybean meal, mix it all up. There'd be like big gunny sacks sewn across the top or tied across the top with what they call a miller's knot, where you wrap it around 3 times and cross it under. And then you take all those bags back home. If you remember the wagons we saw at Fountain City, that's those wagons. That's what they did. They hauled feed to town. They had it ground and prepared, and then they brought it back as feed for their animals, their horses, their cows, and their pigs. And that's where they hid the slaves, the runaway slaves, underneath those wagons. But that's part of that progression. Instead of doing it by hand yourself, it was more efficient to take it to the mill in town, and every town had at least 1 mill, and sometimes 2. And as farms got bigger, they couldn't store all the feed on their own farm, so they would take it to the mill and store it. And then they had surplus feed, the mill would market it for them. The mill would buy it and then sell it on down the line, ship it by canal or truck or wagon. And those things are interesting too. If everybody knows the name Hog Path, everybody know how Hog Path got its name? They used to actually drive herds of hogs to market down Hog Path Road. That's how it got its name.
Really?
Yep, from Pleasant Hill over toward Greenville. Yes.
I grew up in the church that's on the Hog Path.
You heard what?
I grew up in the church that's
on Hog Path. Yep.
United Brethren, I believe it is now. It's probably not in use now.
So all of these things it's history and it's real. And what I'm trying to do is connect what we had in the past to what we have now to where we're going in the future, and not lose that connection between people. That's the community we keep talking about. And that's why we'll go on to the next thing, which part of community is communion. So we're going to do a kind of a little experimental communion. There's a plate up here with a little Christmas cookie. I brought a fruit roll, whatchamacallit, the thing you get for Christmas. What? Fruitcake.
Fruitcake.
But they made it for my wife from New Carlisle, so they made it out of gluten-free bread or gluten-free flour. So when I tried to cut it, instead of cutting it into little squares, it just crumbled into a mush. So it's there if you want to take a spoon and have a little bit of it to see what it tastes like. Otherwise, it's dog food. So we're going to use the cookies here, and I have cider for our drink. So this is from hymn 403. Is that what we're using? So let me read this first. Why do people share? Because the world works better when we do. It would be very hard for every person to make and grow everything they need in life. Someone grows onions and carrots. Someone else makes bowls and spoons. A third person works at the electrical plant that brings energy to your house to heat the stove. Together they can make a bowl of hot soup. Another example of sharing happens at our congressional potluck. Someone brings dessert, Someone else brings vegetables. Another person might set up tables and chairs. Have you ever been to a shared meal? Did your family share by bringing a dish or setting up or eating? There's another kind of sharing which is harder to see. Did you ever teach someone to do something or have someone else teach you? Have you ever told someone about one of your special wishes or one of your fears? Have you listened when someone else told you something special about them? This is a kind of sharing too, when you share of yourself. In our families and in our congregation, we share more than just material things like food and furniture. We also share our hopes and dreams, our fears, our laughter, and our tears. We share what we have learned in school, what we have learned just from living. We share stories about ourselves, about people we know, and stories from all around the world. When we gather together in worship, we might share our joys or concerns, or feelings or ideas we think are important. Today, we'll talk about rituals Unitarian Universalists can do in our worship services to symbolize sharing and how important that is to us. They're called the rituals of communion. Some Christian religions have a Holy Communion ritual. In Holy Communion, each person receives a wafer and either wine or juice with a blessing from a worship leader as a symbol for the connection they share with Jesus. UU congregations do not have a Holy Communion, but many celebrate other types of communions. The most common ones are the flower ceremony, the water communion, and the bread communion. Like the Christian Holy Communion, UU ceremonies are about sharing connections. And I have a poem that goes with that. May you be blessed with good friends and learn to be a good friend yourself, journeying to that place in your soul where there is love, warmth, and feeling. May this change you. May it transfigure what is negative and distant or cold within your heart. May you be brought into real passion, kindness, and belonging. May you treasure your friends. May you be good to them. Be there for them and receive all the challenges, truth, and light you need. May you never be isolated, but know the embrace of your Anam Cara. And that's a Hindu word for soul friend. Soul friend, Anam Cara. And we're going to listen to, which number did we say? 404? 403. If you want to look, you can come up and get a plate, and we'll pour a little bit of cider, and we'll do our own little attempt at communion. I don't have any special words for the eating and the drinking, so partake as you wish. And that is good cider. That's from the, what's the orchard up here on the way to Greenville?
Yeah.
Downing's. That's from Downing's, yes. I love their stuff. All right. Our offering is we're going to listen to 331. And as always, feel free to put something in, feel free to take something out. It is part of our community. Okay?
I've lost it.
You lost a doxology. From all that dwell below the skies, let songs of hope and faith arise.
I've lost it.
We'll just say it. Let peace, goodwill on earth be sung through every land, by every tongue. That is one of those litanies, if you weren't here last week, that even though we say you're not supposed to say what I say, we'll make an exception this time. You can go ahead and say that. Okay, our closing hymn is the Ashokan Farewell. This is a soundtrack from the movie The Civil War, or the TV series The Civil War. Let's see what we get with that. I think it's a handout. I don't think there is a number. Well, it's something that Roberta printed. We don't have a handout for it. All right, our blessing for the community and our closing words. Spirit of kindness and compassion, we come from different places to this sacred ground of communal caring. We are enriched by the company of each other's and are drawn closer to the heart of love in this time of service. Touch this gathering with tenderness so that we may be refreshed anew by the grace that encompasses this morning. Spirit of mercy, we are human and fragile and often frightened. We pray for the blessings of compassion as we face our frustration and pain. We pray for the blessing of courage to help us live with the fear of losing and the sorrow of loss. We especially pray for all those among us who feel the need to feel the warmth of love in their lives. Spirit that glows in the darkness, expand our vision with faith so that we may always remember the unending circle of life and death and love reborn that surrounds us with kindness and compassion. Be just in your word, just in deed. Remember the depth of your own compassion. Do not forget your power in the days of your powerlessness. Do not desire to be wealthier than your peers, and never stint your hand of charity. Practice forbearance in all you do. Speak the truth or speak not. Take care of your body, be good to it. It is a good gift. Crave peace for all peoples of this world, beginning with yourselves. Go as you go with the dream that peace sets firm in your heart. Go in peace, live simply, at home in yourself. That ends our service. There's donuts. They're only a day old, so they're pretty good. And there's still cookies from before, and they never go bad. And there's fruit cake. Feel free to take some for your dog if you want that.